what we actually know now is the strongest predictor is perfectionistic tendencies. So exactly what you just said about that pressure, when athletes like strive for a specific ideal and are really focused on perfecting themselves, that is the strongest predictor of whether they could develop imbalanced relationships with food. My mission overall is to encourage balanced relationships with food in both fuel for performance, health and vitality, and also pleasure. So understanding that food is a part of our cultural context of how we share cultural experiences. And anytime we have one of those out of balance, that is where the issues come in. So really embracing the 3 ways we can balance those relationships.
Welcome to the TrainingPeaks CoachCast. I'm your host, Dirk Friel. In each episode, we'll sit down with industry experts to discuss coaching methodologies, the latest research, and leading tools for endurance training. Visit TrainingPeaks.com for more training and coaching resources. My guest today is Kristen Arnold, who is a registered dietitian, a Level 1 USA Cycling coach, and is the current Women's Development Road Director for USA Cycling. Today we talk about how to create a culture that emphasizes a healthy and performance-focused relationship with food. We also cover the importance of helping young athletes lay a smart foundation as it relates to nutrition, not just for performance, but for long-term health. I hope you enjoy the show and can learn a thing or two that can help you and others develop a healthy relationship with food. Hey folks, welcome to the TrainingPeaks CoachCast. I'm joined today with my guest, Kristen Arnold, all the way from Fort Collins, Colorado, just up the road from our office. Welcome, Kristen.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. I've been listening to the podcast for quite a number of years, so excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm excited too, because this is a conversation we really haven't had before. It's definitely needed in this space of, really talking about how to cultivate healthy culture within your athletes. If you're a coach working with athletes, how can we make food more of a positive? And I think we all have that intent, but it doesn't always come across that way. You have a lot of experience. Tell us about your background, coaching, and also as a registered dietitian.
Yeah, so my background is in nutrition and dietetics. So I went to the Ohio State University and got my RD and also my Master's of Science in Nutrition, and then got my Certified Specialist in Sports Dietetics credential on top of that. And I've been working with athletes one-on-one and in teams contract work for 10 years now. I hit my 10-year mark this year.
All right.
Which is very exciting. Yeah. And on top of that, I coach athletes through Source Endurance, and I'm a Level 1 USA Cycling coach and a team director. So I primarily work with the national team and working with the junior women's programs over in Europe and domestically with some talent ID camps, things like that. So have my hands in a lot of different pots when it comes to both cycling training and racing, and then also nutrition.
This is a question that I think people ponder, but they don't really know the answer to. What is the difference between a nutritionist and a registered dietitian?
I love that you asked that because I spend a lot of time talking about it.
It's kind of gray and fuzzy in most people's heads, so it'd be awesome to get that explanation.
Absolutely. So technically, anyone can call themselves a nutritionist, and so there's no legal ramifications around calling yourself a nutritionist, but not everyone can call themselves a registered dietitian. So a registered dietitian has a 4-year undergraduate degree, a residency for 1 year where they work in a bunch of sectors of nutrition and dietetics, and then they pass a registration exam, and on top of that have to keep up with CEUs and the most current research. So it's a lot more sophisticated. It's a protected title, and generally RDs are going to be a lot more experienced and have a higher level of expertise than nutritionists.
Got it. Okay. And is it even next year, I heard maybe a master's is going to be required?
Yes, they've been threatening it for like 5 years now, and they're finally going to put it in place.
Wow.
So, Yeah, it'll be even more prestigious. And yeah, that'll hopefully even raise the bar higher for our profession.
Yeah. Well, you definitely do a lot of coaching. You're in the weeds, even in the car at races, and you're really kind of absorbing the entire culture of what's happening within high performance cycling. And then your work as a registered dietitian. Tell us about your mission in that area to try and like change culture. Where do you see opportunity? And how can coaches kind of like absorb more knowledge around building a strong culture?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for coaches. I always feel like and think of coaches as the mentors and the guiders for athletes. So athletes absolutely look up to their coaches. They want to appease their coaches and do what they can to be the most successful in their eyes. And so it's a really great, exciting opportunity to provide a positive influence on both athletes for their performance and also their long-term development. So with my mission, I think in the last couple of years, there's been a really great emphasis on nutrition, both at the professional level, but also the amateur level. There's so many new articles coming out and podcast episodes. Yeah. I know the TrainingPeaks podcast has had plenty of episodes talking about how nutrition is incorporated into training camps. Pro teams are designing programs. I'm getting hired a lot more, even by development programs and local clubs. So it's just a really hot topic. But in that way, there's a lot of emphasis on nutrition for performance. So where we before had an emphasis on kind of nutrition for health, there was a lot of conversations about why eating fruits and vegetables is important, like clean foods and understanding like food quality. Now there's this emphasis on performance nutrition. And so I think my mission overall is to encourage balanced relationships with food in both fuel for performance, health and vitality, and also pleasure. So understanding that food is a part of our cultural context of how we share cultural experiences. And anytime we have one of those out of balance, that is where the issues come in. So really embracing the three ways we can balance those relationships.
That's obviously very tough when your number one focus 24/7 is, reaching a podium for a lot of athletes. And now that pressure is even at a younger and younger age. Certainly, we've seen that in gymnastics, other sports that have had that youth movement, if you will, at the Olympic level. But now we're seeing a lot more of that in cycling. We are now hearing about, 17, 18, 19-year-olds signing world tour contracts for 5-year deals. And so now that trickles down to your 15, 16-year-old that's now their new goal because they see it happening. And now this 15-year-old is thinking, unfortunately, good or bad, watts per kilogram. So are you seeing that trend, and is that concerning to you in terms of like signing athletes earlier and earlier within cycling?
I think there is a concern just that they're jumping into the high ranks so quickly, as far as their ability to like develop as a person and get those experiences in life, and also just be thrown into the pressure, along with nutrition. The other area that teams and clubs are focusing on is psychology and the mental aspect of sport. So I think young athletes, when they're 15, 16, potentially in that trajectory, I usually recommend them working with a mental coach as well. But I do have concerns there, but I think like with the right guidance and the right intention, it can be set up for success and we can avoid things like burnout early.
Right. I mean, obviously we want to head it off before it becomes a problem. So therefore it starts with the culture, and it also starts with that coach and what do we allow? How do we speak about food? What are the habits we have within practice, after practice? Can you talk to us about some of the kind of like good tips for coaches to think about laying that positive culture framework to begin with, so we can try and head off some of these problems down the road?
Yep, absolutely. So A lot of this, when I'm talking about coaches, right? We have different types
Yeah.
of coaches. We have parents that are coaching their kids after school club program. And then we have elite level coaches that are working with athletes individually and writing training plans. So depending on the environment and kind of the context of that coach, it changes a little bit. Where one coach, if they're working in an on the ground setting, right, where they're working with athletes on the bike, definitely encouraging performance focused habits during the training session. So things like eating and drinking during training, making sure that they have access to food before, whether they need to make sure that their lunches have carb rich foods. So those individual time points where they're actually seeing the athlete are really helpful. And then also emphasizing what I call foundational nutrition. So that's a term that I think has helped a lot of young athletes understand the concept of needing to eat balanced meals with grains, starches, vegetables, fruits, lean protein. And so when you explain it to them that the tippy top where we're fueling for performance and we're incorporating drink mix protocols and gels and recovery drinks and things like that, those are only as beneficial as our foundation is set. Right. So talking to athletes about where is your foundation at? Did you eat lunch today? What kind of lunch did you have? What food groups did you have present in your lunch?
What about bringing in an expert to talk to the team and kind of, if you're not the expert coach in this area of laying the foundation around, healthy nutrition choices, which you should be reading up on and learning more about, what about leaning on bringing in an expert to kind of lay the groundwork with the athletes?
Yeah, I think bringing in an expert, anyone that has the RD credential or has some kind of other ACSM. There are some other sports nutrition credentials from the International Society of Sports Nutrition has one as well. But those people are going to be able to explain those general concepts about nutrition to the athletes. So then when the coach is working with the athlete, they have a shared pool of knowledge that they can speak on and remind the athletes of the tips and tricks and strategies that were outlined in the talk. So just doing one talk a year, you at least have that context to speak about those topics later when they're necessary.
Yeah, and also letting the athlete know that this is a resource that can be leveraged if they need to reach out to somebody, talk, or letting know the parents that you do have this resource, if you're seeing you need to bring in any kind of expertise. I'd love to talk about language, and how we talk about food, the do's and don'ts of the words that we choose when we talk with our athletes. What are your thoughts around how do we set that up within the conversation?
Yep, language is something that is really important when we're talking to athletes about nutrition. And some of the positive ones that I like to talk about, so fuel, right? We talk about fuel and calories and how energy is important for training and performance. The body needs fuel. When I'm doing a team talk for a group of younger athletes, I talk about how carbs are rocket fuel and fat is kind of diesel fuel, and you need certain types of fuel throughout the day and during training and exercise. And that really helps to put that picture in their mind of what types of foods they need. And also for parents and coaches, talking about nutrient-dense foods versus energy-dense foods. Yeah. So this is a concept that a lot of the coaches and the parents that I talk to, it's a generally new concept for them. And so rather than talking about foods as good or bad foods, it's really about the context of that food, right? There is a time and a place for burgers and birthday cake, right? Yep. There's a time and a place for salads and beans and lentils. There's a time and a place for sports drinks and gummy candy, right? So it's not really that any of these foods are good foods or bad foods, but some have more nutrients, so vitamins and minerals, and others have more energy. And so explaining foods in a way that you are emphasizing the context of when that food makes sense is a really great way for parents and coaches to communicate like healthy, performance-focused eating habits in their athletes.
Yeah, I feel somewhat encouraged in terms of some of the headlines lately are turning towards fueling enough. Whereas, me being in my early 50s and having started racing in the 80s and gone to Europe in the 90s, it was like eat as little as possible 24/7. And that had to just encourage so many bad habits, obviously. And then we had weigh-ins, and that started young. So I would assume you're seeing some of the same headlines, right? Like, are we fueling enough? And we're seeing that from the winners of World Tour races.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So red S, or relative energy deficiency in sport, low energy availability. I mean, unfortunately, these are still, or not still, but they are regular diagnoses and issues that I work with athletes on a daily basis right now. So in the media, yeah, it's been really positive. There is this shift, like there's articles coming out about how World Tour teams actually want their athletes to be heavier, to have more longevity, have a stronger foundation, so they get sick less often, are less prone to injury, actually have that staying power. So there's a lot of really positive influence right now. But at the same time, I mean, if we're coaching younger athletes and we're late millennials or Gen X or older, we have these preconceived notions about nutrition and about food. So really breaking those down and understanding the most current literature is really important.
Yeah. So practically speaking, we obviously know watts per kilogram is definitely a thing. If you're 20 pounds overweight, you're going to go slower uphill, right? So, but that definition of overweight, that's always constantly in the athlete's mind, So how can a coach approach that topic if an athlete brings it up? But coach, my watts per kilogram aren't 5.0 for my FTP. I'm trying to lose weight. How might we address that with our athletes?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think depending on who you ask, you'll get different answers because it's still like a topic we're exploring as a profession. Personally, I feel like, first of all, you can't ignore that watts per kilogram exist, right? Like, we understand as coaches, as people in high performance, that this is something that does matter for the sport. But in that way, there is a healthy, calculated way we can go about exploring whether that athlete, it would make sense for them to change their weight or their body composition. So usually what I suggest is if an athlete brings that up to a coach, the coach explains what are the benefits and what are the potential downsides of losing weight, both in that time of the season, but in general. Also exploring with the athlete, what are their reasons for wanting to lose weight? What kind of language, what kind of words are they using? Is this purely that the athlete wants to be better at their sport and they're considering it in addition to 25 other factors that could help them? Is it about another athlete that they saw that beat them on the course they had a different body shape and size? A lot of that intention of why they're asking and thinking about it is really important to how the conversation can go.
Yeah, we actually took watts per kilogram is not even displayed in our indoor virtual TrainingPeaks virtual app. So we kind of tried to remove the emphasis on body weight and put it more on absolute power. But behind the scenes, watts per kilogram does come into account within the algorithms. How about educational resources for coaches? Any kind of good places to go to seek more help in this area?
I'll need to remind myself, and I can provide it to you, Dirk, to put it in the show notes. But As far as I'm aware right now, the Australian Swimmers Association, so like the NGB for swimming in Australia, they have a whole like 30-page document of how to assess and talk about body composition and what they call the physique in swimming. So I have actually done quite a bit of research on this topic, and that's the only NGB or team that I know of that has like very specific guidelines about language and how to talk about this. But generally, we try to approach it in a very objective way and include health metrics as well, right? So if an athlete comes to me as a nutritionist, dietitian that is looking to optimize watts per kilo or their weight, the first thing we do is a body composition test and see where their body fat percentage is. Because it's possible they're just in a really lean body, but they weigh more. Mm-hmm. And at that point, we can see like what are the potential downsides in performance and health depending on where the body composition of that athlete is.
Yeah. So yeah, it'd be great if you got us that link. We can put in the show notes. And when we talk about the role of the parent, there's got to be, it's unfortunately, there's a lot more pressure on young youth athletes more than the race results. They may be in an eating disorder because of just pressure from social media, from even grades, pressure to get into whatever school, coming, from the parent. So how about any thoughts around the role of the parent and things you like to see versus not see coming from the home environment?
Yep. So naturally, when I work with younger athletes, I also work with their parents. So working with them both, in all the parents that I've ever worked with and that I've seen, they are really invested in their kid being a great person and a great athlete. Like they do mean well. Things I like to see, the first one is really, the biggest one is leading by example from the parents. When the parent is providing access to the food and the fuel and the nutrients and the meals that they need, and then also participating in that, I think that is so powerful, and for the athlete to see their parent participating in that. And also in that way that goes with language as well. So there are studies showing that when one parent talks to the other parent in a deprecating way about body or food, that does translate to specifically young athletes in their eating habits. There's studies showing that the way parents communicate to each other and then also to their child, the athlete as well, has a direct influence, and there's associations with potential risks for disordered eating and eating disorders.
Yeah.
So leading by example. And in addition to that, talking about food and also their bodies in a positive way. So a lot of the coaches that I work with, it's totally harmless. Like they are not intending on it, but making self-deprecating comments about your own body will translate to how the athlete thinks about their own body. So the number of times I've heard a coach say, "Oh, I'm too fat to go on that ride with you. Like I'm not in good enough shape. Like I have too many lbs on me to be able to do that, or you're half the size of me." Making those kind of comments can be potentially damaging, but on the flip side, like having body appreciation and eating those balanced meals go a really long way for the athlete.
Yeah, and also, the pressure at home often, I've seen it, you say the little league, dad or whatever it may be, right? Like adding that pressure so early. But then there's these studies showing the generalist versus the specialist, and specializing too early doesn't always lead to the end result. Whereas a generalist, somebody that, an athlete that has a lot broader background with many different sports, they can draw from all these experiences and be a stronger athlete later on in whatever they do choose. So it's okay to let that athlete explore, and explore a different avenue. So maybe not adding all that pressure at home to be the professional and sign the 5-year deal at age 17. That can certainly help as well. How about differences between boys and girls, men and women? It isn't just a female issue. We see this a lot on the male side as well. So any thoughts around that?
Yeah. So the newest research that I've seen, we used to think that, and we still do think that certain sports like gymnastics or figure skating, cycling is included in that, running is a big one. Certain sports that emphasize a specific physique, athletes in those sports are more likely to develop disordered eating habits and eating disorders. But what we actually know now is the strongest predictor is perfectionistic tendencies. So exactly what you just said about that pressure, when athletes strive for a specific ideal and are really focused on perfecting themselves, that is the strongest predictor of whether they could develop imbalanced relationships with food.
Huh. How might you identify that?
Great question. That is still up for exploring, but things like that I've seen both on the national team and athletes I've worked with individually, when athletes ask you if something is good or bad, like I have a lot of athletes that'll be like, Kristen, is this a good lunch to eat? Or is this a bad lunch to eat? You get, some of these younger athletes, they're getting testing. They're getting lactate testing, VO2 max testing, and they feel pressure to hit certain numbers, and they relate it to their self-worth if they do or don't hit those numbers.
Yeah.
So a focus on numbers, and then also focus on making choices based on their body shape or size. So are they making food choices, or are they doing extra training sessions, things like that, to strive towards a certain body shape or size?
Yeah, or how they show up to practice. I don't know, if they don't have that energy to start with, that could be an indicator. I mean, are there any kind of identifiers that might raise a red flag that we might be more aware of?
Yeah, the most common ones for young athletes, again, it kind of depends on the setting you're in, but the strongest predictors are, one, accumulating list of food restrictions. So there are athletes that make choices to be vegetarian, vegan, things like that for a lot of reasons, and that definitely doesn't mean they have disordered eating tendencies. But as those restrictions accumulate, that's when we need to start paying attention. If athletes don't want to participate in team meals, so we know that having breakfast together as a team, having a pre-race dinner the night before, these are really great bonding activities, but certain athletes will opt out or make excuses to not participate. That's another red flag. And then restricting food specifically for body weight or size changes. So if they're communicating that they aren't eating, or they're only eating certain types of foods for body reasons, that's another red flag.
Yeah. I also think about the other side of the equation, and you kind of mentioned it, but the exercise dependency, to just exercise all the time, and that's just driving them, and you're seeing that. Maybe they don't even record it. I mean, obviously TrainingPeaks is your training log, but maybe not everything gets recorded in TrainingPeaks, and you're seeing that excessive exercise. Might be another sign.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other kind of top tips for coaches in terms of identifying or next steps if they do, suspect an athlete is having an issue? What might those next steps be?
The next steps are, one, document, right? And this is true of really any issue you see with an athlete or in the context of the sport environment. Documenting what you saw or what you witnessed when you saw it, who was there. And then at that point, potentially talking to the parent of the athlete about what you saw specifically, right? You don't have to make any conclusions about what you saw, or if it's even related to disordered eating or eating disorders. You just can communicate specifically what the signs and symptoms are that you witnessed. Best case scenario, there's some kind of team doctor that you can talk to. And again, you would document and communicate those signs and symptoms that you saw in the athlete. And you can, depending on what you saw or witnessed, you can gently have a conversation with the athlete about it. So like I said, if an athlete has food restrictions, like they're vegetarian or they're vegan or they're cutting out certain things, asking them what their inspiration or intention is with that, to kind of see where their brain is at. So making sure that it is potentially connected to one of those issues.
Right. Obviously, most teams, clubs don't have a team doctor. So hopefully you have that outlet of a registered dietitian, or what about on the psychological side of things, like bringing in is it a sports psychologist? What kind of like therapist might you lean to try and help out an athlete?
Yeah, it would definitely depend on the severity of the situation, and what the athlete has access to. A lot of these practitioners have licensure laws, and you can't just work with anyone. But as a coach, also, it's a great idea. I'm glad you mentioned that, Dirk, about having a network of people that you can refer out to, even to just ask them. Like, you're like, hey, I have this athlete, I saw these things. Do you think this is concerning? Yeah. So whether it's a sports psychologist, a counselor that specializes in disordered eating or eating disorders, a sports medicine doctor that has experience there, and then a registered dietitian as well. So again, kind of best case scenario is you have a team of people that are going to provide athlete-centered care. But at the minimum, having one of those three professionals clued in to then help to see what's most helpful.
Yeah. Within your private practice, obviously you see athletes, I assume, beyond just cycling. So any kind of like real differences that you're seeing between sports, that like some sports that are doing it better than others?
Yeah, I work with a lot of different sports. I mean, disordered eating and eating disorders are really uncommon in a lot of team sports. So soccer, lacrosse, basketball. And I think there's in those sports that there's less of an emphasis on weight for performance. So it's just naturally not as discussed. But also the culture of those sports, it's really focused on the skill, right? It's focused on the athlete's skill and performance metrics in context of that sport. So I think that's a great point, because a lot of our young athletes, with all this emphasis on data, they can get really caught up in the power numbers, in the grams of carb they're eating on the bike. And rather than focusing on the skills, like how proficiently can they corner, how proficiently can they identify an attack in a road race. So coaches being able to emphasize those kinds of areas that will help the athlete be successful is another way to promote that, and that other sports are doing better than us so far.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think as a coach, being in one sport, you can learn a lot from other sports. So I always encourage coaches to read about other sports, read about how other athletes have trained. Their biographies, for example, are great ways to get behind the scenes of another sport. I also think of, I don't know how true all this is, but like in Norway, I've heard that for youth sports, they don't keep time. They don't keep score. They don't have like a league rating, the best in the league. We won the league championship at age 14. That just like doesn't exist. It's more about the emphasis on fun, and they want the youth to experience many different sports. They figure out the specialization later on, and that competition comes in later on. They lay that groundwork of that fun aspect first, and then the skill development second, and competition is a distant third. So it is interesting to see how other sports cultures really affect the psyche of the athlete directly, So I'm glad you brought that up. Another kind of trend that's happening within cycling, running, triathlon, sports tech is certainly these food apps. So you've had MyFitnessPal for 15 years or whatever it may be, and that's, if you don't know, that's an app where you can record everything you eat. And yes, it does sync to TrainingPeaks, and we get your macronutrients within TrainingPeaks from MyFitnessPal. But now there's apps that are actually pulling the planned workouts, the completed workout data, and returning within their app as well as within TrainingPeaks, the prescribed nutrition. So what are your thoughts on those apps? Have they been beneficial, or what are areas that we should be kind of cautious around as we see athletes or coaches leveraging that new technology?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've worked with a number of them. The main ones are chronometer.com. And then the newest one, which is really, honestly, I was really impressed by it, is Hexus.
Yeah.
A lot of the World Tour teams are using it. I've used it with some of the teams.
Yeah, we have a compatibility with them. Go ahead.
It works super well. It really does. It programs, it takes the workouts from TrainingPeaks and goes directly into the app, estimating energy needs for the day for the athlete, as well as recommendations for in training and in race fueling. It'll even do things like prescribe a carb load if it's a key event. Honestly, I was very impressed. These are all numbers that a lot of people don't know this, but dietitians, 60% of their job is on a calculator. Right?
Yeah.
They're just
Yeah.
And Hexus is the only one that I've worked with that I really don't even have to double check it. Every time I've double checked it, it's in line with the standard recommendations that we have available.
Wow. And is that dietitian focused, or can an end user use Hexus as well without the dietitian?
The model I know you can use it as an individual, but you can also have an account as a team. So yeah. I was working with a British continental team, and so I was able to see everybody in on the team, everything that they were putting in Hexus. So in that way, awesome. It was like a practitioner-focused, centered model. Yeah. And so in that way, like I said, I could double check everything, and every time I would do my own calculations and compare it to Hexus, it was really close.
Wow. Awesome. I think another great area that you brought up with Hexus and others is they provide the on the bike recommendation as well. And again, for decades and 100 years, that's kind of been ignored, right? It was kind of like, go train with as little as possible, and on race day, just see how well you manage, with what you got on board. But now that focus of, fueling within the workout itself, and I've even thought about workouts whereby it's like, here's your 300 grams, of carbs, don't finish the workout until they're consumed. That's like a different way of like turning it around, of like, the focus today is to learn to consume this amount of nutrition within a certain time span, of course, not 1 hour, but how many hours it may be. So that's definitely got to be a great trend. Any kind of recommendations on like how to focus in terms of like, how many carbs should I be taking in my ride? Is every ride the same? Any tips around fueling on the bike?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll say too, for these apps, I really don't recommend tracking calories or macros other than during exercise for athletes under 18.
Okay.
So it's great if they can work with a practitioner. And so with younger athletes I work with, I'll have them take pictures of everything they eat on their phone and then send those food records to me, and I will put them in the app and make those calculations. And then we'll do education based on where they're at in terms of meeting their needs. But I don't have them use the app specifically unless potentially they're on a trajectory where they're going to be expected to do that on a team. Like if they're on one of these teams that are using these apps and they're expected to use them when they turn 18, that would be a different story. But as far as in race, in training, fueling, for most athletes, we want to start at about 30 to 45 grams of carb per hour for workouts that are over 60 minutes. And then you want to work up to more than that, right? So depending on the intensity and the duration and how many days in a row the athlete is training, we could get up to 90 to 120 grams of carb per hour. But the emphasis is on making sure the athletes can tolerate that first, and then what are going to be potentially the most beneficial strategies for performance.
Yeah. Well, and with the more junior level, I mean, their races aren't 5 hours long, so it's a little bit of a less emphasis on it there, so that's good. Tell us more about how people can reach out and find you and, ask you direct questions. Are you on socials? How can people contact you?
Yeah, my website is sportsnutritionforwomen.com. And my Instagram handle is also Sports Nutrition for Women. So, and I'll say too, I market myself towards women. I've chosen to specialize in addressing things like menstrual cycle irregularity and the cultural context, peri-post menopause. But I don't only work with women. It's just what I've chosen to specialize in. But if anyone has any questions, I work with athletes both one-on-one. I do team talks. I also have an e-course where basically I share all my secret tips in an e-course, and then you could choose to work one-on-one with us in addition to that. But the best way to find me is sportsnutritionforwomen.com.
Awesome. Any final thoughts in terms of just tips for coaches? Anything might be missing?
I think the main takeaways I want coaches to come away with this is, and also athletes themselves, is when we're making food choices or educating our athletes or guiding our athletes, we really, like I said, when it comes to food relationships, understanding the balance of fuel, performance, health, vitality, and pleasure. And also just body appreciation, like appreciating all the things that our body does for us. There are studies showing that translates to reciprocity, where athletes are able to appreciate their teammates and other people around them, in addition to having lifelong healthy habits. So when we appreciate our own bodies, we are actually more likely to make healthy habits and performance-focused habits. Yeah.
And feeling good and living long, healthy, having that relationship with food definitely goes for decades. So setting the standard, really healthy at the youth level certainly is, it's like a great responsibility that coaches have to broaden their beyond. It's not just the X's and O's, I like to say, of today's workout, but it's the holistic athlete. You need to bring it all in. And so that's what I love about this conversation. And hopefully it's opened some eyes to help coaches out when they're working with youth. So thank you so much, Kristen, for your time.
Thanks again. I had a really good time. And if there's any coaches out there that have questions, definitely feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to the TrainingPeaks CoachCast. Visit TrainingPeaks.com for more training and coaching resources.